NIMBY is an acronym that most of you have heard. It's N-I-M-B-Y, NIMBY, and it stands for Not in My Backyard. It was originally used years and years ago. I don't know where it originated, but people used it like, we need a new prison, but NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? We need a new sewage treatment plant, but not in my backyard. We need a new halfway house, but not in my backyard. So NIMBY, it just can't be here. And I adapted it a few years ago to the DJ world, NIMBY meaning not in my backyard. And you see it from DJs who are making excuses for why things won't work in my market. And it's a horrible, horrible excuse. I hope you don't use it. It usually looks something like this. Oh, nobody will pay that much in my market. Nobody likes interaction in my market. You fill in the blank, but somehow you think you're so special, but you're not. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Kansas City, Missouri, Sacramento, California. Similar sized markets are pretty similar. Now, does that mean there are no regional differences? There are regional differences. Some things, on the East Coast, especially the northern East Coast, they tend to do the first dance right after introductions, whereas out here on the West Coast, we typically do first dance after the meal. Doesn't mean it can't be done here, though. Like, we still do that sometimes. So you get things that are sort of traditional. But in terms of what people like, it's not regional. I just went to see a movie this afternoon. I went and saw the new Spider-Man movie. That's not my thing. I'm not a Spider-Man fan. I went, but it's not really my thing. So it was a okay movie, but Spider-Man fans are going to love it. But it's not like, well, Spider-Man won't work in Sacramento, right? Good entertainment works anywhere. That's why Paul McCartney or Aerosmith can, or Kanye West can play in all these different markets. He can play in LA and he can play in Atlanta, right? So NIMBY is not a real thing. If you're using that, you're really using it as an excuse. So if you start thinking that something can't happen because of your market, it's probably a really poor excuse for your inability to make things happen. So people will pay more in every market. Now, there's a big difference between small markets and little markets, right? If you're in New Jersey, if you're in Chicago, if you're in New York or Los Angeles, if you're in a huge market, there are going to be more people that only a certain percentage of people are going to pay top dollar for a wedding, right? So $100,000 weddings, more $100,000 weddings will happen in Chicago than they will in Sacramento. Sacramento's a relatively small market. We do have them here, we just don't have as many. So if you're relying only on $100,000 weddings, you're going to probably not do very well in a small market. But when it comes to DJ prices, I mean, come on, let's be realistic. The top DJs, excluding all the add-on sort of stuff, the top DJs that I know of are in the $4,000 range. Most top DJs around the country are $3,000 or less. Even in a small market where you have a $15,000 wedding is the norm. A $3,000 wedding, a $3,000 DJ at a wedding that is $15,000 is 20% of the budget, and we know that we supply a lot more of the success of the event than just 20%. If you don't believe it, ask your clients beforehand. What percentage of the success of your event do you think the DJ will have? And they've done this over and over and over. After the wedding, people say about 80%. Before the wedding, it's usually about half of that. So either way, it's always well above the 20% mark. So don't get hung up on it's my market. So when you see an idea come into play, somebody's doing something cool with projectors or lighting or whatever the thing is, don't think, oh, that won't work here. You may not want to do it, and that's completely fine. For years I didn't want to do lighting. I didn't like DJ lighting, so I didn't do it. But it wasn't because Sacramento didn't do it. It's because the DJs in Sacramento weren't doing it. A few brave DJs started doing lighting, and now Sacramento's got, lighting is expected here. Same thing in pricing. in Sacramento, there are more $2,000 DJs in Sacramento, which is a much smaller market, than there are in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has a much higher cost of living and way more events, a much bigger market than we are, but they have fewer. And again, depends on which side of the argument you're on. There are DJs who will go, well, yeah, there's just so many DJs here that you got to compete with all these bottom feeders. Okay, or, well, we only have so many weddings to choose from. You got to pick your argument. You can't have it both ways. The reality is every market has DJs who are willing to go out there for a couple $100 and jack up a wedding, right? They think they're doing fine. Every market has tons of $500 DJs. We've all had this the thing where somebody calls us and asks for a price, and it seems like a relatively low budget event, and you give them a really low price, and they gasp, like, "Oh my God, that's so expensive." It can't. People are like, "That's way more than my budget." And I laugh. I go, "It can't be way more than your budget. It's not that much more than free. What's your budget for this thing? Don't be unreasonable, right?" So. NIMBY, not in my backyard. That's an excuse that people make. Don't buy into that. You can do anything in your market that we can do anywhere else, at least within a comparable size. If you're in a market where there are only 12 weddings a year, you're not going to get a whole lot of high-end weddings there. But if you're in a relatively decent-sized market, and you look at guys around the country who are, Jeremy Brecht he's in South Dakota. I think the whole state has like 28 people. And Mitch Taylor is in some part of, I don't know where it's at, like Michigan up here. He uses a different finger when he shows me. But there's nobody that lives there, right? Because it's upper Michigan, up in the peninsula, I guess. So don't do that. Have fun, and you can do whatever you want to do. There's no such thing as NIMBY when it comes to DJ services.